If I was looking to invest in commercial real estate, where would I start? Can you talk me through the deposit? As a first-time investor, what are the common mistakes that people fall into? We're here today with Kieron. If I was looking to invest in commercial real estate, where would I start?
I think you really want to start with your why, because some investors might have the kind of logic that they're jumping into the commercial realm purely to own or occupy the premises for their business, or they might be looking to jump in for an investment towards their retirement fund or just some additional cash flow. So there's always that kind of rationale determining what your why is, because that's going to determine which asset class you're going to go after. Now, there are a few different asset classes in the commercial realm. You've got retail, you've got office, you've got heavy industrial, you've got light industrial, just to name a few. Now, when we're going through those asset classes, some asset classes have lower vacancies, meaning occupancy, than others. If you go into, let's say, for example, the micro-industrial, light industrial space, where you've got small industrial concrete bare shell, 40 metre squared units, and you've got 50 of them, there's a high possibility that you're going to be sitting on the market vacant for a long period of time, compared to if you were to go into a retail space that had 5 shops, 1 that was empty. The conversion rate of getting that one leased is a lot higher compared to something where there's a lot of stock. Also, you need to think about your exit value as well, because if you're looking at any sort of investment, the banks are going to determine how they set the loan terms out. Now, I'm in no means, shape or form a financial advisor, so I can't advise you on that, but being in the commercial realm for a little under a decade and owning commercial property myself, this is what I know. So let's say, for example, I want to buy a building in the light industrial sector. The building's $1 million. In light industrial, typically the banks will give you 65% in terms of the loan to value ratio, which means you've got 650 in cash. That 350 that's left over, or that 35%, is the equity that I need to source. Now, I can do that one of 3 ways. Obviously, I can use cash, or I can use equity from my existing property. That might be my residential property, say, for example. Or I can do it from my books, from my business books. There might be some equity there from assets or liabilities and things like that. So there's a few ways in terms of gaining that equity to get through the front door. So yeah, I mean, if you were to buy it for the purpose of an investment, the banks might actually tee up that loan term with the expiry date of the lease agreement. So say, for example, it's a 6-year lease. The loan will come to an end on year 6 on that expiry date, if you were lending on it from an investment point of view.
So Kieron, if I had identified a commercial space that I was interested in, can you talk me through the deposit versus sort of commercial and residential deposits?
Yeah, great question, Ruby. Now, the commercial lending realm is very different and a little bit more complex to your residential sort of sector. If we look at it from a perspective of loan to value ratio, the typical LVR for residential is about 80-20. So your deposit terms and equities sits at around 20%. Now, in accordance to the Reserve Bank, the highest sort of loan to value ratio for the commercial sector sits at up about 70, but it all depends on the asset class. Say, for example, if I take you back to the light industrial sort of realm, the typical loan to value ratio would be 65%, meaning that 35% would comprise of the equity and also a form of deposit. So no matter what it takes, if you're, say, for example, you've got $200,000 in equity on your residential property, that $150,000 cash would obviously be the requirement to raise that further equity of that 35% for light industrial, if that makes sense. The deposit, whatever that is, would be reflected on the sale and purchase agreement, which is typically 10%. It could be $50,000, it could be 5%. Doesn't really matter, because the settlement funds are going to be paid in entirety on that settlement date. But in terms of the lending sort of scenario, it all comes down to the asset class. Now, with bank to bank, depending on who you're banking with, and I want to remind you again, I'm no financial expert, some banks might actually take into account a margin depending on the risk of the business or depending on the risk of the building, because some buildings in commercial are a lot older than others that have depreciation factors or risk that the bank might need to take into consideration before giving you that lending.
As a first-time investor, what are the common mistakes that people fall into?
A big one would be due diligence. Let's say, for example, you've successfully purchased your commercial property and you've gone into want to lease it out straight away. Some first-time investors take it on themselves to save a quick penny. they'll put the property up on the market privately, and then they'll start sourcing tenants, and they'll just pick the tenant who seems to be the most stable, but they're not doing the correct due diligence on the tenants. So what they'll find, let's say for example, if I've got a brand new plumbing company and I'm keen to secure the property tomorrow, as a first time investor, I'm thinking, great, this guy's coming in straight away. I'm going to start getting some cash in the bank that's going to help me offset my mortgage repayments. It's going to keep my risk low. When in reality, if they're a brand new business and you don't have any form of bond or security or a bank guarantee to assure that they'll be able to make their commitments under the obligation of the lease, they might or could start defaulting month 2, month 9, or month 13 of that lease. So doing your due diligence on a tenant once you've secured them before you even put pen to paper is critical, and working with a local agent that knows that area really well, that knows the businesses, that's done the majority of the transactions tenant to tenant, would be the best way to go, because it saves you as well from the risk of non-compete, where you're bringing in, let's say for example, a hairdresser over here and then a hairdresser right next door. There might actually be competition in terms of an arrangement there where you can't bring another tenant in due to the non-compete. So there's a few things that need to be considered, which are simple mistakes that first-time investors make because they haven't done their homework correctly.
Would you then say to the investor, it's probably best to have somebody managing the tenancy?
All the time, absolutely. Now keep in mind, commercial is amazing in that regard, because typically with your residential portfolio, you as the landlord, you as the owner, are responsible for paying all of your outgoings or operating expenses, we like to call them in the commercial field. They could be things such as your council rates, your body corporate fees, your insurance, standard utilities, and your property management fees as well. In the commercial realm, your tenant pays all outgoings. So they communicated that from the get-go. On the lease agreement itself, it stipulates 100% or a proportion if they're in a building. And some of those fees, the property management fees, are already built into their OPEX cost. So they're paying it anyway.
I've seen a group of shops, commercial spaces, vacant for such a long time. My understanding is access to it could be quite difficult. What's your opinion on why spaces remain vacant for so long?
That's a great question. There could be a few underlying things as to why they're vacant. One could be the location, as you touched on before. If there's a lot of yellow lines around the building and there's no customer parking, that causes an issue, right? So access to the site because of no parking could be a restraint as to the desirability in the tenant's point of view. Another thing could be rent as well. If the landlord's asking rent that is way above the current market rent, it could actually be a deciding factor that a tenant says, look, I just simply can't afford this. But also floor space as well, stud height, depending on what the tenant is hoping to use it for. Those are all things that get taken into consideration when they make their selection on choices.
Can we talk a little bit about fit outs?
100%.
And how that works? And is it on the leaseor to take the fit out when it's over, or how does that all work? Great
question. I'll break it down in its most simplest form. So when a tenant moves or secures a building for lease, usually the tenant or the agent or the landlord will write in a fit out clause, a tenant's fit out to premises clause, which gives them the right to fit out the premises so that it's suitable for their business use upon approval of the landlord. Now at the end of the lease, the tenant might be required at their cost to reinstate it back to how they found it. This is discretionary on the landlord, because the tenant might have actually added huge amounts of value which could be beneficial for the improvement of the property as a whole, but also useful for the incoming tenant that might want to take it after. So usually what happens before a tenant moves into a space, we do what's called a pre-condition report, where the tenant and the landlord will go around, take a picture of the premises and report down what was noted before they move in, and then upon expiration they'll do another check just to see what the landlord would like to keep or what the tenant will need to remove in preparation for the outgoing exit moving forward. So that's the best way to go about it. But the good thing about commercial is that the landlord gets to keep any assets that the tenant wishes to remain, because they don't want to go through the hassle. Let's say, for example, they put in a $5,000 heat pump and they put a $2,000 security system in. Those are good assets to keep for the premises that's actually improved its value.
Can we talk a little bit about yields?
So the best way to calculate yield, obviously, or return on investment, ROI, is by calculating what the rent is by the property's value. Now, if it was a recent sale, you'd probably just revert to the sale price. But if it's a property that's been, let's say, for example, under the owner's portfolio for 10 or 15 years, it's probably good to get a registered valuation report done to get an indication of what that price would be in the current market. So the rent over the price of the building will determine what the yield is. Typical yields in Auckland or in New Zealand sit around 5% as a benchmark on average. However, if you're looking to jump into the space, the higher the yield is, the more affordable the building is. So you actually want to buy where the yield is high and sell where the yield is low. Yeah, the lower the yield, the more profit that you're going to be making in terms of the margin and return.
Thank you so much for your time today, Kieron. I have learnt so much. I've always been interested in the commercial sector, so I appreciate it so much. If someone wanted to find you online, where can they find you?
Visit us at our Harcourts Northwest page. We've got a commercial listings page dedicated to commercial. I'm available on the phone, text, email, call, socials. I'm everywhere. So yeah, please reach out to me. Would love to assist.
Thank you, Kieron.